Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story: The Hunt for a Wendigo. Ever since I found out about Wendigos, I've been obsessed with them. They're mythical creatures that are rooted in the Algonquin-based Native American folklore. They have heightened senses, they're extremely fast, unnaturally large, and strong. These are all advantages that help them stalk their prey. I'm so intrigued by them because no one knows if they actually exist. I've spent hours researching about them. I know pretty much everything about them. The Wendigo is pretty much the embodiment of gluttony, always consuming yet never satisfied. They're always at the point of starvation. I've read about so many skinwalker and Wendigo encounters, but no one actually knows if the stories are true. So neither do I. That's why Rose, Charles, and I made a group for hunting mythical creatures. We go out into the forest sometimes to look for the creatures. We haven't had any luck yet. I love to talk to my grandpa about them, and hearing his stories about them are always the best. Every time he tells me a story, at the end of it, he says don't go near the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada. The thing about this is that I am too curious, and I live near the forest he talks about. It's 25 minutes away walking distance. I know my way around the forest because of my map, and it's so close to my house. I've been there before with my friends, but we've never been that deep into it. The doorbell rings as I get a message. I open my phone. The message says, "I'm here." I walk downstairs to the front so I can open the door. As I look through and open the door, I see Rose and Charles. "Hi," said Rose eagerly. Charles groans. "Hey, are you ready yet?" "We just walked here to make sure that you were ready," Rose added. "Yeah, come inside really quick. I have some stuff I need to grab," I insisted. Rose exclaimed, "I got a new tracker this weekend." "Is it actually a good one this time?" Charles murmured. Rose states sarcastically, Yes, I would totally buy a broken tracker." "I'm messing around with you, geez," Charles snickered. We all head out of the house and in the direction of the forest. About 30 minutes later, we make it to the edge of the forest. I take a deep breath, looking into the slight fog and menacing atmosphere of the viridian-tinted forest. Minutes passed until I broke my eyes free before entering the forest. This time the atmosphere was different. It was so thick, eerie, and it felt alive. I've never actually believed that I would encounter a Wendigo. We just enjoy going exploring and pretending that we'll run into it. We walked through the forest for what felt like hours. I knew it was the deepest we've ever gone in, and I had lost where we were on the map. Rose flustered with concern. "Hey, we've been walking for hours. Are you sure you know where we're going or how to get back?" "Yeah, don't worry, Rose. I have my map and compass with me." We came into the forest from the west, and we're heading north toward the caves, I reassured. Everything looks the same around here," Rose scolded. "I mean, they are all just trees and bushes," Charles smirked. We walk deeper into the forest as dusk falls upon us. The golden pink horizon illuminated over the forest, leaves and shrubs creating beautiful shadows. We walked for a little while until we stumble upon what looks like a slaughtered animal. All we see is red, blood red. The cedar trunks of the trees, the mossy green ground, the evergreen shrubs. Those colors were no longer vibrant greens, only objects doused in blood. I can't believe my eyes. There was no words, just silence. I couldn't tear my eyes from this gruesome, mutilated mess of whatever it was. Could an animal really do something like this? I questioned if we were alone in these woods. Minutes passed with terror in our bones. Dead silence, no animals in sight. Not a single sound carried through the forest as the sun falls behind the horizon. Until I hear a few branches breaking from in front of the bloodbath. I look ahead of the mess into the darkness, only to see two bright, frosty-colored eyes peering into my soul from within the obsidian-shaded forest. More branches break through the forest ahead of us, approaching closer, slowly stalking us in the darkness. As I look closer at this horrendous monster's outline as it approaches, I see something hanging from its mouth. I think that it's a hunk of flesh, but I can't make it out. I fix my gaze towards its hand and I'm instantly filled with terror. I knew what this was. I see a hunk of flesh in its mouth. Its unnaturally long and bony fingers are gripping onto a human head. It was the thing I've been looking for. I can't believe it. I never thought I would actually run across one of them. That face, the abnormally large body with skin stretched across all of its bones. I knew right then, and there I had to run. I had to run for my life. It was now or never.
Ah!
Rose squealed as she realized what was in the forest with us. I turned around as fast as I could. My friends and I started running for our lives. Shortly after, I could hear it intently chasing after us. Branches snapping behind us. As we run with no direction, the Wendigo lets out an inhumanly screech. My heart is pounding as we all hide, hoping the creature doesn't find us. We're all so exhausted and out of breath, yet trying not to move or make a sound. We listen closely as we hear cracking of twigs inching closer to our vicinity. That's when I heard the most eerie sound in my life. Not too far into the woods, I heard a soft voice of a little girl asking for help. "Help, please. Someone come help me," pleaded the small girl. It can mimic voices? What is this? I mean, there can't be a little girl out here this deep in the forest all by herself, right? Without hesitation, Rose jumps out of her hiding spot and goes to try and help the small girl. "Hey, little girl dash," Rose murmured. Within a second of her speaking, I hear her vocals cut out, and I heard nothing else but the horrific sounds of something I couldn't even imagine. I look out from my hiding spot to see Rose completely mangled and her blood all over the soil. I couldn't believe it. Why did she do that? She knew it was after us. I can't help but stare, and my friend is just gone like that, and I couldn't even help her. I'm so sorry, Rose. We should have never come here. I brought you here, and I never should have done that. Hey guys, you can come out now. It's safe. The monster ran away, Rose reassured.
Oh my.
Rose. How could it do this to us? It stole her voice, and now it's trying to lure us out. These things are sick. I heard what that thing did to her. She can't be alive. There's no way I could let it trick me like this. I look hastily at the creature from my hiding spot as I wait for my opportunity to run out of this place for good. It felt like I must have been waiting there for hours, waiting for this thing to leave, because it knew we were hiding somewhere there. Through the dark, ominous forest, there was stray beams of light and laughter approaching. The creature heard the laughter and branches and decided that it was done here. It wanted to go after whoever was over there, so that's when we took our chance to run west and get the hell out of that forest. I ran until my feet blistered. At the sight of lights, I sighed in relief, then collapsed to the ground as I'm panting, choking on the fresh air, bawling my eyes out with Charles. I feel sorry for those people, but I barely made it out alive myself. Rose wasn't as lucky as we were. I collected myself after crying and shaking on the ground for what felt like ages. I got up, gave the forest my last goodbye, and went on my way through the dark night, illuminated by only stars in the sky and the empty streetlights. Never again have Charles or me mentioned this to each other or anyone again. It's buried as deep in our memories as far as they could go. Second story. Whatever you do, do not read this story out loud. They might hear you. I cannot stress this enough. Do not read this story out loud. Do not mention anything about this story in any audible way. Pass this on via message through cyberspace only. It seems to be the only way to keep your distance without them finding you. Please, 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 for your own safety, do not say anything about this out loud, especially their name. Those that I am referring to are known by a few names. Navajo culture refers to them as Yinaldlishii. Some natives in Canada, the northwestern coast, and the Great Lakes region tribes referred to them as Wendigos. I refer to them as skinwalkers. Call them what you will, but Do not say any of their names out loud. I say this because they hear their name and respond to it the way a great white shark reacts to a drop of blood in the open ocean. It is not a simple hunt that the skinwalkers perform in a general direction of the audible name.
It is an instinct.
A drive so animalistic that it is ingrained in every single one of them. Say it once, and you may get lucky that the trail goes cold, that their senses are diluted, and you escape. Say it twice. Well, at that point you're playing with fire. You're taunting something that not even your worst nightmares could come close to touching. They will not hunt you down instantly. No. All things take time in this world. They do not move fast, but they move at a steady pace. They will find you, whether it be days, weeks, months, or years. Well, that depends on just how evasive you manage to be. But don't worry, they all catch up eventually. I'm writing this to you simply because I have made that mistake. Once when I was young, I read the name out loud in a folklore book while trying to sound it out. Strike one. The second mistake I made just last month at a trivia night at my local bar. The question referred to the mythical creatures of terror in Navajo folklore, and I guess after one too many shots, the names slipped out of my mouth. I know they're coming for me. It's only a matter of time. I'm going to keep a running log. It's the only way I'll stay sane. Maybe somebody will stumble upon this and finally get some mainstream knowledge on this legend. Navajo tribes are extremely tight-lipped about this subject for good reason. Skinwalkers respond to audible sounds of their names. They aren't like demons from exorcism movies who have proper names. No, these things all go by their standard names of Skinwalker, Wendigo, or Inald. For simplicity, to save myself the time, they'll be Skinwalkers from here on out. Nobody knows the true figure of Skinwalkers. There's accounts from those who were lucky enough to escape for just long enough. Skinwalkers are genderless, gaunt, pale figures. They stand 7 to 8 feet tall. At times they move to all fours and crawl around with the grace of a tiger or lion, yet most are comfortable and mobile on their 2 feet as bipedals. Some take on the shape of a moose head with the long and wide paddle-like antlers. Some purely take the shape of a human face with barely recognizable features. The best I can describe their human appearance is similar to the Slender Man stories of a tall and elongated thin man with no face. They don't kill you, not instantly. They slowly drive you mad. They thrive on the mental breakdown that you begin to feel every time you think you see them. The more that you mentally bleed out with your insanity, the more that come near. Navajo legend is that more appear to quicken the breakdown, but the initial responder is the only one who gets the kill. Now, for the fun part. Skinwalkers survive on flesh and emotional distress. They don't destroy a body, only the essence of the human spirit. They inhabit the flesh of those they kill. They walk around wearing their kill skin, allowing them to blend in among the public. They never look fully there. They look as though they are wearing a semi-expensive Halloween costume. To those that aren't paying attention, nobody bats an eye. But if you really look hard, you'll see the absence of life in their eyes. You'll notice how clumsily they string sentences together. You'll notice that their mouth doesn't seem to sync up with what the tongue is saying. Imagine a museum of wax with all the perfect collections of human replications. Imagine those being heated to about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, just enough to start becoming deformed. Maybe the wax expands in certain areas. Facial features don't match the mood they seem to be expressing. That's a skinwalker. There's a good chance you've walked past a couple in your life, but maybe you were just too wrapped up in that Facebook post. They absorb your mental distress, whether it's thoughts, emotions, memories, etc. It's been said that they speak to people in voices that are familiar to their prey. You can hear people that have been dead 40 years, or hear somebody you just talked to earlier in the day. They are tricksters, more or less. The hunt is more than half the fun to them. The Midwestern Canada tribes depicted the Wendigos as giant coyotes. It's fitting, really. They hunt in packs, there's a leader, they torment their prey, and are incredibly vocal. I'm sure you're asking yourself, damn, this kid sure knows a lot about a legend that the people don't talk about. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. You want to know how I found out? Because these fuckers have found me. They've been visible a few times, but I can feel them around me at all times. I can feel their fucked up, soulless eyes on me everywhere. The worst? Trying to fucking sleep. I'm too afraid to sleep with my lights off. There's too much moonlight pouring into my bedroom, which only gives me the opportunity to see the shadows fall across my bedroom floor. If I close the shades, I can hear them scratching at the windows trying to get a view. If I leave the lights on, it's impossible to see what's on the other side of the window. Do you want to know what's scarier than being stalked by deformed, half-melted humans? Not knowing if they are on the outskirts of your property, or if they are right in front of your window staring at your every move. I haven't been able to tell how good their sight is at night. I've watched them at night as much as they have watched me. I don't see the Reaper ever during the day. The Reaper is what I call the one coming after me. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I can just feel it is. I first spotted it at the edge of my tree line in my yard. It was about 2 days after I said it for the second time. I knew what it was right when I saw it. It was a milky figure about 50 yards from me. I couldn't just brush it off because it didn't magically disappear like how all other ghost stories have the apparition conveniently disappear instantly. Nope, I had to stare down with that motherfucker for 6 hours. It saw me and I saw it. Now, partially the stare down happened because I froze up with fear. I felt like I was in a trance. Something gripped my attention. I knew it could see me, but I felt that it recognized I was aware as well. I sank to my knees after about 2 hours. Only the top of my head would have been visible. About 2 minutes after sinking down, it began to slowly move sideways through the tree line, almost as if it believed I had given up. The second I popped up, it froze. I tested this theory a few times, and the result was the same. It couldn't make out the top of my head, which makes me believe the vision isn't as good as mine is. I also do not think the critical thinking is there, as I ran through the same cycle about 5 times without it picking up. The skinwalkers seem to run on instinct alone, patterning their behaviors on what they see. The biggest problem they have is that they do not interact with other humans, they simply float along. This makes them easiest to spot once trying to converse with one. They're awkward, clumsy, and again, the reactions don't match. Have you seen somebody fake laugh? That's how they respond to what they think is a joke, a fake belly-style laugh. However, they fail to move their eyebrows, squint their eyes, and smile in a similar manner. I discovered my first and only true skinwalker 2 days ago, while I was out to lunch. I had stopped to open the door for somebody walking out of a local burger joint. I opened it for them and said, "There you go," and tried to slip in the door. The skinwalker stopped just outside the door and responded with "You're welcome" and a big toothy grin, like they were smiling for a dentist taking x-rays. The eyes seemed to be bubbly and watery, almost like how I would imagine a caricatured dog's eyes would look. The skin around them was saggy, yet the forehead skin was pulled so tight. I gave an incredulous look, sort of stunned at how awful this thing was. It responded with that god-awful fake belly laugh. The more intense the laugh got, the more freaked out I got. The face itself became almost hazy, like somebody was turning on one of those anonymous filters in front of it. In a split second, the face snapped back to normal, and the thing simply walked off. I don't know, it gives me the creeps the ways the eyes sort of wobbled back and forth. It still makes my hair stand up. I don't want to believe I'm going through this. I don't want to believe that I saw a human-like moose crawling around on all fours, peering from around the side of my shed last night as I took out my trash. I don't want to believe that 5 days ago, a random stranger knocked on my door asking to borrow a spark plug because his car was out of gas, while holding his hands out in a thumbs-up position. When I told him I couldn't help him, he said adios and just walked away with an ever-so-slight haze around him. I don't want to believe that I'm hearing the voice of my ex-wife pleading to let her in from the cold as I hear faint tapping on my front door. But let me tell you, it's real. It's all real and happening to me here. This isn't like a video game. I don't have some goddamn progress bar to let me know how close these things are to me. I don't know how much time there is left. They seem close, but nobody is moving in on me yet. Whatever you do, do not say any of this out loud. Otherwise, I can assure you, you'll be in a similar situation to me. I'm sitting here typing this up as I can see the skinwalker just sitting on my shed, waiting for me to finally break. To slip up and open my door the next time it mimics my grandma's voice. To say its name out loud one more time to strengthen its hold on me. Maybe I'm on a cusp, just far enough gone to where I'll be hunted forever. Maybe they're taking their time to wear me down. I wish I had answers. I only have problems. Fuzzy-faced, emotionally disturbed, mutant moose-sized problems. I just went in my bedroom to get away from the scratching outside my front door. Every window has fog on one of the corners, I'm presuming from one of those things breathing right outside the window, steaming it up. I can see one of them right now as I sit on my bed. It's sitting with just the top of its eyes and head visible. The eyes are sunken back into the oversized sockets. I can see the veins in the eyeballs glowing a fluorescent blue, highlighting the inflamed red around the eye sockets. The eyebrows are at an odd height up on the forehead, as if they started drifting upwards from their normal location. I can see it sizing me up. I feel like I'm being tasted via the sense of sight. It started whimpering to me in the infant voice of my brother. Let me in, please let me in. I'm freezing out here. How can you just knowingly let me freeze? I'm dying out here. Please just help me. Open the window so I can warm up. Please, and shit like that on repeat. It's really doing a damn good job at driving me insane. I'm half tempted to just open the window and get it over with. These things have been in Navajo culture for thousands of years, probably dating back to the times before paper. How I am supposed to stop something that hasn't been stopped in thousands of years? I'm another statistic. The only hope I have is to eliminate their food supply. Everything starves, right? Maybe by spreading the story, the skinwalkers will start to disappear. Maybe they'll go into hiding or a hibernation. I wouldn't count on it though. They seem to know what they're doing. So for those of you reading this, just be careful. Tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year. I don't know if the skinwalkers pick up on technical transmitted signals. Maybe they don't yet, but at some point they might adapt. So if you hear a tapping at your window tonight, don't turn over in your bed to check it out. If you see steam in the corner of your living room window, don't go out front to check it out. If you hear somebody knocking at your door unexpectedly, take a quick peek first. Pay attention to people's hand motions while talking, their facial expressions and reactions. They're out there. They may be after you next. Slowly closing in on your whereabouts, awkwardly bumping into you, and feasting on the nights that you can't sleep. Or maybe they got to me by time you read this. There's no way of telling. Then again, maybe I didn't write this. Maybe they did. Maybe they do respond to you just thinking the name, saying it over and over in your head. Guess you'll find out. Third story. I used to be a park ranger in the Adirondacks. I think we're all in trouble. It was close to 3 in the afternoon when the knock came on the door to the ranger station. I was mildly surprised to hear it, given that it was early January in the foothills of the Adirondacks and the temperature was hovering at a balmy 12 degrees, with wind chills driving it into the negatives with frustrating frequency. The wind had been howling against the isolated station since before sunrise that morning, and I wondered if I was going to need to deal with any damage to my little abode after the storm blew through. I'd been monitoring the forecast and weather radar all day, and it looked like I was in for quite the blizzard by the time evening rolled around. It had been snowing most of the day already, but so far it hadn't been very heavy. I expected that to change by nightfall, however, which, in January, was only in another couple hours. I didn't usually keep the front door to the ranger station locked, since it wasn't uncommon for hikers and campers to make a pit stop on their way up the trail to the observation areas, either to log their camping site for the night, or just in hopes of a nice hot cup of coffee before they continued on their hike. The door hadn't been latching correctly lately, though, and had the tendency to swing open when a strong gust caught it just right, so I'd been keeping it locked until I could repair it. The knocking was light, somehow hesitant and almost polite, if that makes any sense. It was so quiet that I almost didn't hear it over the whistling of the wind and creaking of the station. I'd been in the middle of composing an email request for a new generator, as mine had been acting up a bit lately, and had to pause my typing and listen intently to ensure I'd even heard it in the first place. When it came again, only a bit louder, I pushed back from my desk and took another sip from my steaming mug before walking over and opening the door. Outside stood 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in what looked like expensive and very new cold weather coats and snow pants, all looking very similar except for the various bright colors and all bearing the familiar North Face logo. Their anxious faces peeked out from within their drawn and cinched hoods, and I had to suppress a grin. They looked dressed to climb Everest, not hike the lower trails of the Adirondacks. Tourists. Probably European, and probably their first time seeing this sort of weather, I thought. It was a fairly common occurrence. Folks from all over the world came to visit these mountains, looking to experience all the beautiful wilderness we had to offer. I wasn't unsympathetic. If you weren't used to the unpredictable climate here in the winter, it could quickly catch you by surprise and get dangerous very quickly. "Hi there," I said cheerfully, stepping back into the doorway and motioning them inside. "Coming out of the snow and warm up by the fire." The man who'd been knocking turned to his companions, said something in Spanish, and then turned back to me with a wide grin and nodded, stepping past me and into the warmth of the station. The rest followed quickly, anxious to get out of the chill wind that was blowing hard outside. As soon as they were all in, I closed the door again and locked it to make sure it didn't blow open. "Gracias, sir." "I am Martin," said the man, pulling back his hood and unzipping his quilted down coat. He gestured to the others in turn. "This is Lucas, Diego, Sofia, and Triana." I nodded my greeting to each. Martin continued with a smile. "It is very cold. We come to visit USA from Spain, to see your beautiful mountains and enjoy the lovely scenery." His accent was very heavy, but his English was far better than my Spanish, so I didn't have much room to criticize. "But it seems a storm is coming, and we fear there will be too much snow. Unfortunately, we are not so prepared for that." I nodded, patting him on the shoulder as I moved past him and opened the door leading to the shelter room, reaching in and turning on the lights. "That's certainly true, my friend. I'm afraid we're in for a bit of a blizzard this evening." "Bad time for a winter stroll through the mountains," I said. "Fortunately, we happen to have enough space for you and your friends to make yourself at home and wait out the storm. My name is Jackson Turner, Ranger. There's coffee over there on the table, and bunks and a comfortable sitting area in here." When the group just stared at me blankly for a moment, I got the feeling I'd lost most of them somewhere along the way. Instead, I just offered the friendliest smile I had and gestured to the room. At that, they all grinned and nodded their thanks as they quickly shuffled past me, dropping their packs on various bunks and beginning to remove their cold weather gear. I made sure they all got something hot to drink and that they understood they were welcome to stay until the weather had cleared before returning to my desk. They all seemed very pleasant and grateful for my assistance, and they drifted from my thoughts as I continued my administrative work. It was another hour before the second knocking rapped at the door, this one slow and oddly arrhythmic, almost a staccato beat, somehow unsteady and not as tentative as my other guests had been. I sighed heavily and straightened, heading around the counter and back over to the door. I hadn't had any visitors to the ranger station in a week or more, and now they were pouring in like this was a holiday, an express, or something. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, putting on my official greeting smile once again. In the doorway, shoulders and hooded head covered in a layer of icy snow, was a man of roughly my height, about 6 foot or so. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed in fancy, color-coordinated cold weather gear, but instead wore a mismatched combination of clothes, like he had raided the bargain bin at a second-hand expedition store. His pants were a blue quilted nylon and looked more on the expensive side, even if they didn't exactly fit him very well, but his coat was fur-lined and looked like it was made of padded wool, layered over an old fleece jacket. His boots looked newer and not too warm, something more suited to a summer hike than a winter in the mountains, I thought. "Hey there," I said as warmly as I could, waving him inside. "Come on in out of the snow." He didn't say anything, but gave the slightest hint of a nod as he walked past me. The strong scent of musky body odor followed him, and I wondered if he was one of those reclusive hermits that I'd heard rumors of, living out here all by himself in some makeshift shack. I closed the door and locked it again, turning back to the man. He'd already taken note of the bunk room to the left, where the Spaniards were getting settled, and he headed on in and sat on one of the empty bunks in the back corner of the room. He didn't remove his coat or offer any greeting to the others, and I noted with some curiosity that he didn't have any sort of pack with him, which further made me wonder if he lived nearby in some off-grid cabin. I could see that the others were smiling and making pleasantries towards him, but he just sat there, dark eyes quietly watching the activity, without a single word. There was the slightest hint of a smile upon his lips, incongruous and somehow unnerving. It only took them a few moments to abandon their attempts at including him in conversation and turn back to their own group, speaking quietly in Spanish amongst themselves. For a moment, I wondered if he might be in some sort of shock. The temperature was dropping pretty quickly outside, and it had already been too cold for some of the clothing he wore. I considered giving him a quick once-over to make sure he didn't have any frostbite or signs of hypothermia, but something about him told me he might not be so welcoming to my attention. I stood there in the doorway to the bunk room for a minute, looking over the scene. Something about the newcomer seemed off, somehow. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the way he moved, his lack of communication, the way he was just sitting there perfectly still on the corner bunk, just seemed strange. There was something else, too. Something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Something that tickled the back of my consciousness, just out of reach, more an instinctive unease than coherent thought. I found myself hoping the man would spend a few minutes warming himself and then be on his way again. Turning my attention to the others, I realized that they must have found something odd with him as well, as they had all subconsciously clustered around the end of the table farthest from him and were speaking more quietly than before, more subdued. I noticed them periodically casting quick, uncomfortable glances in his direction, but never for more than the briefest of moments, as if they were just reassuring themselves that he hadn't moved and was still sitting there. I also noticed curiously that none of them sat with their back to the man, likely also subconsciously. I was just about to walk over and talk to him, to shake the odd feeling away, when Martin appeared in front of me, his brow furrowed. "Sir, my friends and I are worried about the other campers," he said. This drew my attention. There weren't any campers registered to be out here today. Was the newcomer one of them? Maybe they were in trouble. "What campers?" I asked with a frown. He motioned vaguely to the north. We passed their campsite on our way to the observation point before the weather turned us back here. Maybe a half-kilometer up the trail, in a clearing beside a small brook. He cast a quick look over his shoulder at the stranger sitting in the corner. There was again, I thought, that same unease. Martin continued. There were 3 of them. 2 men and a woman. They had some of those cold weather tents set up and seemed to be well prepared for the storm, at least as far as we could tell. We stopped and warmed ourselves by their fire for a bit. They seemed very experienced and were not concerned about the cold, but I am no expert. "Well, it sounds like they should be okay," I said with the best reassuring smile I could muster. "They should have checked in with me, but if they're as prepared as you think, I'm sure they'll be just fine. When the storm passes, I'll head up there and check on them, just to make sure." He flicked his eyes to the man again, and then locked them with mine with a surprising intensity, like he was trying to tell me something with his gaze alone. He lowered his voice and said, "The campers, they were all wearing very good clothing. Sophia's brother is a climber in some very cold regions, and she recognized the camper's gear as similar to what he uses. Even better news than I started, but Martin cut me off. Exactly like the pants that man is wearing now, he said quietly. I looked over at the man again, once again taking note of his hodgepodge combination of clothing. The gloves he still wore looked to be thin and ill-suited to the winter weather, but looked well-made and would have been fine for a mild autumn outing. He still hadn't moved or said anything, and his emotionless eyes drifted slowly across the Spaniards with what seemed to my growing paranoia like a hungry interest. It was almost like he was inventorying them, evaluating them somehow. Once again, that tickle in the back of my brain, telling me something was not quite right with the man. Something was just a little out of place, but I still couldn't figure it out. It set my teeth on edge. I looked back at Martin. Are you sure? He shrugged. As sure as we can be. Sophia says she is certain, but the rest of us do not have the experience to recognize these details as well as her. Was this man with them? I asked, but I already knew the answer. Martin shook his head.
No.
I have never seen him before now. He leaned in a little closer and lowered his voice. This man, there is something, he said, trailing off, unable to find the right words. I nodded. I know. I feel it too. I walked back to my desk and opened a drawer, retrieving the holstered handgun and attaching it to my belt. The spare magazine went into my pocket, and I grabbed my heavy jacket from a nearby hook and pulled my fur-lined hat over my ears. Martin followed me, watching with interest. I looked over his shoulder, making sure we were out of sight and earshot of the bunk room. I'm going to check on the camp. Have you ever handled a shotgun? I asked. He nodded. I hunt pheasant with my cousins every year. I am a very good shot. Good, I said. That doorway beside my desk is my room. Right inside you'll find a 12-gauge pump, loaded but not chambered. If you need it. He just gave a silent duck of his head. I should be back within the hour. I know the place you're talking about. Keep him here until I return, but don't do anything if you don't have to, I said, closing my coat and making sure the zippered slit covering my holster was open and accessible. Be careful, Jackson Turner. I feel some darkness in the air. I just gave a tight-lipped nod before opening the door and stepping out into the wind. The icy chill hit me immediately, cutting through my heavy pants and finding its way through every little opening in my clothing. The wind out here was a constant buffeting and howled in my ears. The snow along the trail was only a little over ankle deep, but tugged at my boots with every step, slowing my progress. The area that Martin had described was one of the few marked campsites along this area of the trail, and though it wasn't strictly required for campers to check in before setting up, it was highly encouraged. This deep in the woods, 20 miles away from the nearest town, the only real lifeline that anyone had were the rangers. If anything went wrong out here, the fact that you registered with the local ranger station may very well mean the difference between life and death. That didn't mean that everyone followed that rule, though. Most of the time, it was new campers, those folks lacking some of the wisdom of experience, that didn't know or didn't think it necessary to check in before setting camp. Sometimes it was the opposite. Some highly experienced outdoors folks felt that there was no need, that they could handle anything that came their way. Either way, as I followed that northern trail, a growing unease began to color my steps. I felt the tight grip of anxiousness tickling my every breath. I didn't know what I was going to find. If I was lucky, I'd find 3 cold-weather, double-wall, silicone nylon tents, with their occupants snuggled warmly and safely within. If that was the case, I'd just check on them and turn back to my station, hopefully before the worst of the storm began in earnest. If not, well, I'd have to figure that out when it came. Asterisk. A half-hour later, I reached the campsite. Or at least what was left of it. The remains of what were obviously 3 high-quality winter tents were positioned compactly around a central fire pit, their bright red material shredded and torn and flapping violently in the fierce wind, looking very much like a lunatic array of flags in the heart of a hurricane. I pulled the ears of my hat lower, adjusting the chin strap tighter. "Hello," I shouted, straining to make my voice carry above the wind. Even with all my force, it still sounded pathetically impotent in the roar of the coming storm. "Is anyone here?" I waited a long moment, but could hear nothing but the rush of wind and the whip-like snapping of the nylon fabric. The campsite had all the hallmarks of a bear attack, except I hadn't seen a bear in months, and we'd never had a bear attack in this area that I'd ever heard of. It wasn't like the forests out west. We didn't have brown bears here. Black bears, yeah, but they were smaller and nowhere near as aggressive as big browns. Sure, they could be dangerous, especially if startled or threatened, but they didn't actively hunt humans. I took a few more steps forward into the campsite, drawing the Sig Sauer 10mm and holding it at low ready as I performed a quick visual of the tents. Nothing. No signs of bodies, blood, a struggle, anything at all. Just destroyed tents that could have been abandoned by the campers when the wind started getting bad and the fabric started to fail. And then it caught my eye. A flash of dark gray, partially hidden by the snow between 2 of the tents. Another 10 minutes of snowfall, and I'd have never seen it. Moving closer, I towed the frozen bundle of cloth, overturning it before picking it up with my free hand, keeping the Sig at the ready. It was a pair of thick winter pants, old and torn and covered in dark red-brown stains that looked too fresh for my comfort. They were fur-lined and looked to be woolen. As soon as I lifted them free of the snow, the wind blew a familiar musky smell into my face, and I dropped them in revulsion. Another 2 feet beyond, the hint of blue in the white drift drew my attention, and I cautiously approached. I recognized the puffy material of a cold-weather jacket, and when I reached out to expose more of it, I staggered backwards in shock, realizing suddenly that I was looking at a crudely dismembered arm, still wrapped snugly in its warm jacket sleeve. I cursed aloud and stumbled backwards, tripping over the stones surrounding the fire pit and falling hard on my ass, eyes wide and not even registering the pain of my tailbone meeting the frozen ground. I sat there, hyperventilating, for what felt like minutes, long enough that the frigid chill was settling into my legs and backside from where I sat dumbly in the snow, eyes wide and breath ragged. It was only when my arms began to shake that I realized I was gripping the handgun as tightly as I could, aimed insanely at the gray mass of frozen trousers on the ground before me as if they were going to suddenly spring to life and attack. "Shit," was all I could think to say as rationality suddenly returned, clearing the pulsating red spots from my vision and slamming my thoughts back to the present jarringly. The pounding in my ears began to lessen, replaced once again with the unrelenting wail of the wind. I leapt to my feet and started running back along the trail, back to my station, where Martin and Lucas and Diego and Sophia and the other girl, whose name I couldn't remember, sheltered from the coming storm with what? Was he some sort of psycho serial killer, stalking the lonely hiking trails of upstate New York? That didn't make any sense. I'd been here for 3 years and never heard of anything like this. As I ran clumsily through the snow, which was now halfway up my shin, I thought back to those gray pants, discarded in the campsite. They had been shredded, not just torn and ripped from age and wear. It had been something violent that caused the damage, and the blood stains seemed to lend credence to that theory. So, whatever had happened, the stranger had decided to replace his damaged and stained pants with what? Those of his victims? And then I thought about how none of his clothes matched and how his boots and gloves weren't even suitable for winter weather. How long had this been going on? 20 minutes later, The dim yellow lights from the windows of my station appeared suddenly from the nearly white-out conditions that had overtaken me with the full coming of the storm. The temperature had dropped even more, and I was amazed that I had been able to keep up my pace long enough to make it back, driven by adrenaline and fear. I slowed to a halt before my ranger station, noticing immediately how the front door hung open a few inches. My mind urged me forward, to go racing in, but I had to take a few moments to catch my breath and let my racing heart slow a bit before I entered. I couldn't understand why the door was only open a few finger widths. If it hadn't been locked, the first strong gust of wind would have blown it fully open and sent it banging against the wood paneling of the wall behind it. But what occupied my thoughts far more was the implication of that open door. There's no way it could have been missed by anyone within, and nobody in their right mind would have sat in the station while the freezing wind and snow blew in through the open doorway. I pushed the door aside and crept as quietly as possible to the door, pushing it gently at first, then with greater force, as I felt some resistance holding it closed. I gripped my sidearm tightly, muzzle directly forward and at chest level, finger resting along the frame of the pistol, and ready to drop to the trigger and go to work in a moment's notice. The door gradually gave way and pushed inward far enough that I was able to slide through the gap, the howling of the wind and the protesting of the building blessedly providing enough cacophony to cover the sounds of my entrance. As soon as I stepped inside, I found myself in the center of a fever nightmare. A body lay behind the door and had served as an impromptu barricade. I could only tell that it was one of the women by the delicate shape of the body, as the head and upper torso had been savagely mutilated, the skin and scalp torn away from the red-white of the skull viciously, presumably while she had desperately tried to make her escape from whatever hell had pursued her. Blood slicked nearly every surface around me, hot and stinking of copper, and I became aware of a wet, tearing sound emanating from the bunk room. The lights in that room were flickering chaotically, the hanging bulb in the center of the room swinging maniacally, as if it had been recently struck and was still settling its pendulum motion. As quietly as I could, I ducked around the doorway into the room, fresh shock coursing through my body in a cold wash that threatened my consciousness. Bodies and pieces of bodies lay strewn about the room haphazardly, most still enshrouded in bits of clothing, now tacked in place by sticky crimson. I could feel the heat in the room from whatever horrifying act of violence had occurred, from the bodies that now lay scattered about like discarded playthings. At my feet, I noted a handful of empty shotgun shells, where they had fallen and been arrested by the viscous gore that painted the wooden floorboards. The shotgun lay nearby, chamber open and magazine tube empty, only inches away from the barely recognizable remains of the man I'd known as Martin. Terrible slashes and wounds covered his ravaged corpse, looking as if he'd been thrown into a shredder. His limbs were outstretched and only attached by the yellowish tendons and pink muscles which now lay open and exposed. My eyes were drawn at that moment to the source of the sounds I'd heard before, and I saw the crouched form of the stranger straddling one of the bodies, Lucas, I think, by the bright yellow of his North Face jacket. I watched in horror as the stranger dipped his head again and again, jerking it savagely each time it came away, as if tearing away more bits of meat with each movement. I noticed then that the stranger's hands had somehow grown, elongated, and taken on a shiny chitinous appearance that left the fingers as jagged and gore-encrusted claws. After only a moment's shocked hesitation, my reflexes took over, and I snapped the muzzle of my handgun up and squeezed the trigger. I know that the thunderous blasts of the 10mm must have been deafening, but I barely registered it as I watched blackened holes appear in the thing's back. It threw its head back in what I can only hope was pain and cried out in a shrieking screech that drowned out all else. I squeezed the trigger again, and another bullet punched its way through the horrifying thing. Suddenly, Almost faster than I could track, the stranger exploded up from where it had been feasting and lit upon the wall, its terrible claws sinking into the wood and holding it in place as it turned its head 180 degrees to face me. The eyes had turned completely black and grown to the size of golf balls, and the jaw looked almost to have disjointed from its skull, the skin at the corners of its mouth drawn back in a hideous grin that stretched nearly from ear to ear, exposing a mouth full of shark-like triangular teeth, now stained bright red. It tensed, and an instant later it had leapt to the next wall, gripping the exposed wood like some monstrous insect, eyes fixed upon me. Before it could make another move, I fired again and again and again, my panic-induced attack miraculously finding purchase, more often than not, as empty brass cases ejected against the doorframe next to me, ringing out like death bells. Then there was a long moment of silent stillness in a room, and its black eyes were fixed on me, still unnervingly cold and alien. I tensed, waiting for the thing to pounce towards me, but it was clear I'd heard it. I don't know how badly, but black ichor dripped from the half-dozen wounds punched by my hollow points, and I thought I heard a sickly rattling in its slow, deep breaths. With a final ear-splitting, otherworldly shriek, it leapt again, this time away from me and through the window at the rear of the room. The glass shattered outward, and then it was over. I stood alone in this charnel house, left only with the remains of the 5 Spanish tourists and the disconcerting awareness that the slide of my handgun was locked back, smoke lazily drifting from the barrel and the magazine now empty. Asterisk. That was almost a year ago, and I've since transferred from field operations to an administrative position within the Park Service. My office is located in the middle of a city, surrounded by people and without a lonely forest or dark wilderness in sight. After the investigation died down and the deaths were ruled as animal predation, I tried to return to my posting, but I just couldn't do it. They tore down the old station and built a new one closer to the trailhead, and I thought I could get past it, but I kept seeing that stranger, that creature, every time I closed my eyes. A few times in the dark stillness of the night, I thought I could hear that banshee wail echoing in the distance. Once or twice, I think I heard more than one. I slept with my handgun on the nightstand and the shotgun propped next to my bed, and kept the doors locked at all times. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there. Maybe searching for me. Maybe it needed to make sure that I wasn't able to tell anyone about it. You see, in the time since that horrible night, I've scoured the internet for any possible explanation for what I saw. I consulted any self-proclaimed cryptozoologist or paranormal investigator that would speak to me, but nobody had any rational explanations beyond fairy tales and urban legends, and invariably I was left with as many questions as I started with. And then I tripped across an article one day that changed everything for me. It was a piece written about something called the Uncanny Valley, an idea put forth by some Japanese roboticists back in the 70s. At first, I almost passed it over, since it seemed mostly to relate to robots and computer graphics and how people feel increasingly uncomfortable the more realistically human they appear. But then I read a theory about why people may react this way and how it may be an evolutionary artifact left over in the dark corners of our reptilian brains. About how, at some point in our distant shared racial history, there may have actually been predators that looked almost human. They may have appeared so close to our ancestors that they were able to blend in with us almost perfectly. According to the theory, primitive humans may have developed a keen sense of facial recognition as a survival mechanism. This may have been passed down through genetic memories, fading just a little with each generation until today, where it existed as little more than an instinctive warning when we looked at someone who wasn't quite right. Someone who seemed almost normal, but perhaps with the slightest of imperfections that made them seem just a little wrong. Someone that our instincts told us didn't belong. Someone who wasn't really one of us at all. I wondered if these things have been with us all along, hiding among us, stalking us from within our own numbers. Yesterday, on my commute to the office, I noticed a young woman sitting by herself in the back of the subway car. Even though it was crowded, the seats beside her were empty, and I noticed that the other commuters almost seemed to be avoiding getting too close to her. I don't think anyone really realized it, but people kept glancing uneasily at her out of the corners of their eyes. There was nothing overtly out of place with her, and it could have just been happenstance that nobody had elected to sit down next to her. I just couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something just felt off. Fourth story. The Weirs Beach, Wendigo. Before June 28, 2019, I was an avid urban explorer. I would always look down back roads for abandoned houses and soon-to-be torn-down barns. I'm also a photographer by trade, so naturally, I brought my camera along with me to capture the experience. So when my grandfather invited me up to his summer lake home in the White Mountains, I was gleeful. Not because of the mountain scenery or the private lake with multiple jet skis, no. I was giddy at the thought of being able to explore one of my most sought-after abandoned destinations, Surf Coaster. Surf Coaster was a massive abandoned water park about 2 miles from Weirs Beach. The park covered about 10 square miles and was rumored to be the urban explorer's paradise. I arrived at the nearest public parking lot, a Cumberland Farms, at around 6:40 p.m. I used my phone to see a topographical satellite view of the large abandoned parking lot of the water park. I was led down a few side streets and back roads until I saw the sign. Hidden among vines and bushes was a blue sign with yellow-tinted bulb lights surrounding it that said Surf Coaster. Next to it was a rusted and rather puny 2-foot-high gate with a faded "No Trespassing" sign. I'll pretend I didn't see that. Stepping over the obstacle, I was presented with a parking lot with a few scattered 80s-looking hatchbacks and sedans. They were rusted with their windows smashed in and graffiti plastered all over them. The parking lot stretched about 70 feet in front of me and then stopped to another fence. To my right there was a wooden fence, and to my left down a step hill was an urban explorer's dream. Water slides covered with ivy and moss, pools filled with deflated inflatable toys, and sunning chairs with towels still on them. As I started down the embankment, I stopped at what must have been the ticketing booth. Inside the ajar door was a small room consisting of a chair with a comb on it, an open cash drawer underneath the counter, and a roll of tickets behind the chair. As I stepped inside, I noticed something in the open cash drawer. It was money. Water-damaged money. I picked up a 50 and held it up to the golden hour sunlight to see the blue security strip running down the bill. It was real. Why in the world would the company leave money at their closed park? I thought to myself. Placing the bill back in the drawer, I continued down the hill. The next 2 hours were fairly standard for urban exploring, chipping paint, dirty water, rotting wood, all except for one small detail. The towels. On most of the lounge chairs by the large pool were people's towels, as if they had just left them. I thought nothing of it and ignored it. After I had seen the last enormous moss-covered water slide, I only had one more place to go. The bathrooms. Now at this point in my adventure, the sun had already set, and a cool breeze was making the hairs on my arms stand up. As I traversed the crumbling pool deck to the hillside bathrooms, I noticed something odd. The bathroom doors. The doors were rusted steel, with large locks on them. When I got there, I was right. Large rusted locks were holding the bathroom doors shut. But why the bathrooms? I wanted to explore them, but they were built into the hillside and were mostly underground, so there was only one entrance. As I looked around for a rock or some heavy object to try and dislodge the locks, I realized that the ground surrounding the bathrooms were scattered with bullet shells. They were still shiny, and using my scarce weapon knowledge, they looked to be .30 caliber rounds. My stomach turned as the park could actually be closed due to an active shooter or terrorist. Wouldn't that have been on the news? I mean, that's a big deal. I settle myself, as they could have just as easily been rounds fired by some rednecks who used the water park as their gun range. It was New Hampshire after all. I soon found a rusted fire extinguisher and successfully knocked the men's room lock off. Inside was an assortment of more towels, swim goggles, duffel bags, and dried-up sunscreen bottles. The whole room smelled like vinyl for some reason, and I could barely snap a few pics before bolting out of there. Odd that they would lock that up, but it could serve as a home for homeless people or drug dealers. I was just going to skip the women's room, assuming it would be more of the same. But then the thought hit me, what if it was something else? What if it was the same? I had to know. After retrieving the fire extinguisher from the bush I threw it into, I knocked off the second lock and opened the heavy door. A blast of air hit me. There were two things wrong with that air. One was the fact that it made me as cold as I had ever been, and that it smelled like a rotting animal. I stepped out of the way to let myself warm up for a few seconds. I saw a good photo opportunity there with both doors open, so I took it. Setting my shutter speed to capture the light just right, I was about to take the photo when through the viewfinder I saw something that made my blood curdle. Movement from inside. There was a grayish-brownish movement coming from inside. I dropped my camera and froze in fear. The faint lighting the full moon gave was enough to reveal the creature that slowly emerged in front of me. It was crouched down to fit inside the doorway, so I could only guess it was 9 feet tall. Its face was that of a wolf, and it had teeth that jutted out of its lips. Large green deer antlers topped its head, and its fur was greasy and slimy, like that of a dog's saliva, and as started at it, it let out the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. Its wail was high-pitched and raspy at the same time. Adrenaline rushed through me as I turned to run back up the cracking stairs to the hill. My feet pounded on the moist soil as I neared the parking lot. I glanced over my shoulder, and only then could I see the complete mass of the creature. It had to be at least 10 feet tall, and its strides on all fours told me I had to run faster than I had ever run before, if I wanted to live.
So I did.
I ran all the way back to the main road, and all the way to the gas station, all while listening to its ear-piercing wails grow farther away. I practically dived in my car and nearly stalled it trying to peel out. I drove the 2-hour journey back to Lincoln with my foot to the floor most of the ways. Even though I'm back in civilization, I still don't feel safe, and I regret going there. I also regret dropping my camera. So if anyone wants a Canon 1DX, check the abandoned bathrooms at Surf Coaster, but beware of the Weirs Beach Wendigo.
Fifth story.
My hometown is missing. I've spent the last hour Googling the name of my hometown. Nothing is there. All of the local schools. All of the local restaurants.
Gone.
Even my social media is messed up. I can't find any of my friends online. I can't find anybody. I'm actually kind of freaking out about it. Has anybody ever experienced anything like this before? Don't believe me? Try it yourself. Folleton City High?
Gone.
Folleton Middle?
Gone.
Folleton Elementary School?
Gone.
Folleton City College?
Gone.
That preschool behind the tire place, and next to that McDonald's which my mom took us to growing up? You get the idea. All gone. Thousands of people. Dozens of places. I can't find information for anybody. It's like we disappeared. I can't even reach the cops. I wish that were the only problem. My family and I woke up this morning to a total blackout. Every single house on the block lost power. That does tend to happen out here in the valley, often enough that my older brother Mark rigged his computer to get a connection via satellite. The two of us are currently crouched beside the generator, desperately trying to get a handle on the past few hours. My parents are panicking. They won't say anything.
They won't say why.
But we have our suspicions. I saw something in the woods last night. Right before the power went out, when it was still dark outside, Mark woke me up and pulled me over to his bedside window. He pointed frantically into the trees behind our house. It was raining. The mist made it difficult for my eyes to adjust. But after a moment, something big, we only agree on something big, darted towards the neighbor's back porch. A thick branch fell in its wake. Then somebody screamed. My parents rushed into the room right at that moment. I guess they heard the commotion and freaked. Mom beckoned for us to get away from the window. I gave in right away because my parents can be scary when we don't listen, but Mark lingered there a little while longer. I didn't see what he saw. Mark whispered that he saw somebody running. He said it looked like they were running away from something. My father turned off the lights. I found that odd, and pushed my brother aside. He squinted out the window in silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he concluded nothing was there, just wind in the trees. Then the power went out. My parents have been acting very weird ever since. During the day, my mom tried to keep us in the kitchen. She made breakfast, lunch, and dinner over the fireplace. She even broke out a board game in the afternoon, and we played for a couple hours. She kept asking about schoolwork, or football, or baseball, or anything but the odd situation we were in. We tried to change the subject, tried to ask her what was happening outside, but it was no use. She ignored our questions. My father had a wild look in his eyes. Mark, and I can't recall anything like it. He kept rushing to check the window every few minutes. Then he would sit down to check his cell phone. Then back to the window. Then back to his phone. Like clockwork. Each rotation left him more agitated than the last. The cable didn't work. The internet had been spotty. There was really nothing to do but read a book or play a game. Mark asked to go for a walk before dinner. I thought Mom might pop the temple out of her forehead. Nobody goes outside, she snapped. There could be live wires on the ground. Mark snorted. Watch your attitude, she barked. And keep the windows closed. I asked why, and she just stared at me with these deadly, fearful eyes that made me really uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted to tell me something, but my father answered instead. I didn't even realize he was listening. Nobody goes outside. I returned to my book without argument. I found one of my mom's old Stephen King collections and stumbled onto a story about rats in a basement bigger than a man. Time moved a little faster while I read. The walls of my house started to evaporate. It didn't take long for my imagination to disappear down the stairwell in the story, plunging further into the darkness with each step, listening to untold things move around me perilously through the blackness. Somebody knocked on the door around 10 p.m. After an entire day of endless boredom, I thought this might be salvation. Thank fuck. Maybe a maintenance worker. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe my friend from down the block finally convinced his mother to traverse the minefield of imaginary live wire. I got up from my chair to answer the door. My father sprinted across the room to block me. I don't think I had ever seen him run before. He put his hand over my mouth. I tried to protest. He squeezed my arm. He didn't look angry. He looked scared. His eyes were on fire. It grew quiet outside, like somebody was listening. One finger over his lips told me to shut the fuck up. I looked over to my mom and saw her doing the same thing to my brother. He looked like he wanted to cry. The knocking resumed. The pace was pleasant. At first, your typical formal but friendly rat-tap-tap. Then a pause. Then rat-tap-tap. I was confused. Why were they scared? Why would a burglar knock? I thought that this could be somebody who could tell us what was going on, and it annoyed me that my parents were paranoid, so I got the idea to try saying something anyway. Not my best thought. He dash. My father grabbed me by the throat and pushed me up against the wall. His sweaty palm slipped against my mouth. He raised one finger to his lips and held it there. My brother whimpered in the corner. The door hinges whined from the pressure of the knocks. My father reached into his pocket with a hand that was formerly placed around my neck. I knew he had a knife in there. And just as soon as it started, the knocking stopped. The house got quiet again.
My father let go of me.
It's been hours since the knocker left. My parents still won't talk to us. My mom is sleeping on the couch. My dad is sitting in front of the door with a gun across his lap. Can anyone please tell us what the fuck is happening in Fallen City? I still can't find anything online. We are available through message and comment as long as our connection holds. I don't think I'll sleep much tonight. It's too quiet. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.